But let's talk about Sydney for a second. Despite all the genuine efforts of successive governments, both federally and state, childcare fees have become quite expensive, as we've all heard in the news. So expensive that in some parts of Sydney, it's more expensive than even elite private schools to send your child to a childcare centre. So given that parents with 0 to 5-year-old children tend to be young and have not yet established their careers, how can these young parents afford to send their child to an early education centre or a childcare centre? And how are we as a nation accepting the fact that we will see fewer and fewer children born in Australia just because parents can't afford? We don't have those extended family supports and things around us now, and one of the only ways for a lot of families to manage career and children is to have access to early childhood education or a service close by. So what can we do about that?
Look, I think issues around affordability for me as Minister, it's what raised with me by parents all the time, and I think we're naive to think that cost isn't a factor, and in some families' case a pretty big factor. I think we would all agree with that. I guess where I see it from our perspective, and one of the things that I've found since taking on this portfolio is trying to explain to people how funding systems work, trying to make sure people understand that the federal government has responsibility for the long daycare sector in the 0 to 3 age bracket. I know what they're trying to do with their jobs for families, and I commend them for that. I'm still interested to see how that plays out on the ground when it comes into effect, because I'm hearing from services different things about that, and even from families who have got some concerns about what it might mean for their personal circumstances. And I've raised these things that have been brought to my attention with the Federal Minister as well, because that's my job to make sure that the feedback that I'm getting from the sector in New South Wales they are aware of as well. I guess for us at a state level, having responsibility for funding the preschool sector, we've put a lot of supporting behind what we've done with our Start Strong program. We've committed to funding that through to 2021, and what we've seen in our last preschool census is that the average daily fees for families across New South Wales have actually dropped by 25%, because increasing our spending in that sector, we've also demanded that there's a fee pass-through of 75% of increased funding to families to make preschool cheaper. We do that for year before school, and we do it for the disadvantaged 3-year-olds, so children from the low socioeconomic families, the mums and dads who might be struggling that you mentioned. We want to make it more affordable and more accessible for them. So that's the place where as a state government we can really make a difference from the ages of 3 and up. But I agree, there are still challenges for the 0 to 3 age bracket for parents getting back to work, and there's definitely more work to be done.
I think this is a really good question, because I was actually just speaking to a family recently, and I was asking them whether they were going to be sending their child to school next year, and right off because he was they have the option of keeping him back for another year. And straight off the bat, the dad said to me, "Oh no, he's going to school because we're paying $25,000 a year for childcare fees." And I thought the fact that he has that at front of mind, it's a clear pressure that people are actually calculating. And I think when we talk about childcare and the accessibility of childcare, we need to understand that affordability is a crucial part of that conversation. I think when we're talking about it, we, and I speak obviously from a Labor perspective when I say we understand that operators are doing the heavy lifting. They've got, and I commend the ACA for their research that shows about the high fixed costs for operators, and particularly small operators, that they, whether it's rent, whether it's their other fixed costs that are associated with operating a childcare centre, they are doing significant heavy lifting. On the other side, parents are paying very high rates of and as I think the question noted, some of the highest rates in the OECD in terms of proportion of income on childcare fees, and that's a huge impost on families. And decisions like that about whether to send your kid to school or not aren't being made on an educational basis, they're being made on a financial one, and that's just clearly inappropriate. From a Labor perspective, we think that the government needs to step in, that they are the ones that need to be providing it, and whether it's through, when we were in government, the Early Years Fund to provide a higher wage for workers, whether it's to redo subsidies and ensure that the people, the low socioeconomic families have more support in order to be able to access childcare. These are the things that government needs to be doing, because it's not fair simply to be lumping it back onto operators or lumping it back onto parents, because they are already doing their fair share.